Hey everyone, I'm Jeremy Safran. Welcome back to Kitco News. Well, there's an undeniable shift happening in the U.S. and global financial system, one that ties directly to gold, the United States dollar, and of course, the future of economic stability. In recent months, record amounts of gold has been moving into the U.S., fueling speculation that something bigger is at play. Now, the sheer volume of gold transfers, more than 12.5 million ounces since November, is creating tightness in global supply, particularly in London, one of the world's largest gold hubs. Now, this raises urgent questions. Who is buying all this gold and why? Is it private institutions, foreign governments, or is it even the U.S. Treasury itself? One theory gaining traction in the U.S. government is preparing for a full-scale audit of the gold reserve in Fort Knox, an event that could reshape global monetary systems here. Now, high-profile voices such as Elon Musk, Senator Rand Paul, and former presidential candidate Ron Paul, who we recently had on this show, well, they've all demanded a full independent audit of Fort Knox, which has not been inspected for more than 50 years. Now, Musk even suggested live streaming the audit to ensure full transparency. Well, with all these developments, what does it mean for the future of the U.S. dollar, global trade, and of course, gold itself? Here to break it all down is Peter Grandich, a veteran in financial markets. Peter has managed hedge funds, advised major institutions, and authored Confessions of a Wall Street Whiz Kid. He's also the founder of PeterGrandich.com, a leading voice in the gold and commodities space. Peter, welcome back to the show. Great to see you.
Good time to be interested in gold.
Yeah, you're not kidding. And it's funny because there's still a lot of news outlets that are not covering the moves in gold. But of course, let's do it here and start with something a little bit critical. Right now, the U.S. government officially values its gold reserves at just under $45 an ounce, a number that hasn't changed in decades. Meanwhile, spot gold trades nearly $3,000 an ounce, making new records in the open market. Why hasn't the U.S. adjusted the book value of its gold holdings here, Peter?
Well, I think it's part of the fact that finally business people are at the helm at the moment at this country. Let's face facts. Donald Trump was a business person first, long before he was a politician. And Musk, I think, to me, Musk is the Einstein of business for the 21st century. And he's just a phenomenally man with such brilliance and, be able to do so many different things. I still can't believe they land that rocket back onto the pad each time.
Yeah.
About what that takes. So I think that's the one reason. And I think also there was a plan to monetize as much of the asset base that they can because the debt is so huge. And obviously, with gold being valued at the books at $42, it doesn't make any sense to keep it at that level. So I find it interesting. I will say this, when you talked about an audit, and even having it live, as long as it's not Geraldo Rivera going to open it up, because the last time he did that, nothing was there, and we don't want to see that nothing is at Fort Knox. Yeah,
we definitely don't want to see that. We will revisit this one, but I'm curious, there's a lot of this talk. We've seen it this past weekend, on X. Elon Musk obviously giving a lot of attention to it as well. Could we see an official revaluation of gold to reflect real market prices at what's making new highs this year?
Yeah, I think that's coming. I think that's part of it. I don't think what people should do, Jeremy, is confuse what's been transpiring up to a few weeks ago. Mm-hmm. The serious purchasing by central banks to a few weeks ago had nothing to do with what's happening. This is a separate issue that's taking transpire. Those banks were buying because they were preparing for what they view as an eventual change in the world monetary system, partly because of what's transpiring with BRICS. And as much as Trump wants to threaten that he's going to break their kneecaps if they continue, I think they will. But this movement is more, I think, related to the U.S. and what it plans on doing with its gold holdings. And therefore, I believe we will get that revaluation. And it makes sense because it does kick in almost $1 trillion of paying down some debt by the higher level of our gold holding. What I don't think is what people should be concerned about, and every once in a while I get an email still about it. Does this mean they're going to sell the gold? I think that's the last choice of theirs, to sell the gold. Look at countries that did and how they're hurting now. Unfortunately, your country, Canada, did it, and I think they would like to have the gold back that they had sold.
Yeah. I think a lot of politicians wishing that they could go back in time here. Okay, let's stick on this theme because if gold were to be revalued, as you just mentioned, and we talked about this overpowering debt problem in the U.S., could it help stabilize America's debt to GDP ratio? Perhaps is that part of the plan?
My opinion is this is just a pause. When I hear there's a lot of good things Trump has done. One thing you can say about Trump, whether you love him or you hate him, what he says he was going to do, he does. Very few politicians after they're elected, percentage wise, do as much as he's already done for what he said he was going to do before he was elected. But one of the comments that he's made continuously that eventually this and other things and a Bitcoin reserve, strategic reserve will somehow eliminate the debt. To the amount of discretionary income we would have to suddenly make as Americans to meet all unnecessary bills and have extra money to pay down 36 trillion is beyond impossibility. That's why the eventual reset in the world and what central banks are doing, recognizing not just our debt. This is not just a U.S. problem. Large-scale national debt is throughout the Western world and even in China. So it goes to us, it at least makes those of us who pounded the table about gold for the last 10 or 20 years proven correct all along for much lower prices, that it would prove to be the number one asset that people would look to as the debt would get worse and worse.
Yeah, you mentioned that national debt problem there, and it's surpassed its $36 trillion mark. I know the Congressional Budget Office warning that by 2031, almost every dollar of tax revenue could be consumed by interest payments and mandatory spending. Now we're seeing from this last meeting with the Fed, they're now signaling concerns over another debt ceiling crisis. Some officials are suggesting a pause in balance sheet runoff, currently allowing $25 billion in treasuries, $35 billion in mortgage-backed securities to mature monthly. Adding to the uncertainty, Donald Trump has backed a plan from House Republicans to raise the debt ceiling by $4 trillion. But again, negotiations could take months. Peter, how do you see this debt ceiling standoff playing out here?
Well, I wish they get rid of that wording because 120 something times it hasn't worked. The ceiling has gone through. The problem we have is you make a very good point, Jeremy. The Congressional Budget Office says that we are going to hit $54 trillion in debt at the rate that we're going at. Well, if you just put a 5% interest rate at that point, we'd be talking over half of what we took in as a nation in our best year 2 years ago, just going to pay interest. We could not operate the rest of the country as we've grown accustomed to. So we also must say that one of the negatives that I find about Trump at the moment is just about everybody is not going to pay taxes, just no matter who you are. Well, how are we going to do all of that and not pay taxes and yet be able to pay this all off? And no one's really asking about that point because we're in a sense, we're somewhat stunned. I think people are really, some are happily stunned to see how much waste and potential trillions of dollars that has gone out the door. But to believe somehow all that's going to be stopped, put on the right side of the ledger, and then be able to pay such a huge amount of debt off anytime soon, I think is a falsehood.
Yeah, it's fascinating to watch these numbers continue to climb on the debt front. And we're also seeing it when we get back to the gold and silver front. We're seeing unprecedented movement of gold from London into the U.S. The numbers are staggering, Peter. We got 12 and a half ounces of gold. 40 million ounces of silver have been delivered into COMEX vaults since November of 2024. JP Morgan is reportedly set to deliver $4 billion worth of gold for February COMEX contracts. Meanwhile, in China, banks are continuing to sell out of gold due to overwhelming demand. South Korea Mint has temporarily halted gold bar sales. What do you make of this massive transfer of gold into the U.S.?
I think it's part of this strategic use of gold that Trump plans, but I think it's bigger than that. Now, I must tell you, I've been part of a group for 20 years, and for a lot of those years, a certain person used to call us tinfoil hat folks, because not only did we speak about the manipulation that was going on, which subsequently was proven, but we talked about how much gold has been lent out and lent out multiple times to the point where if ever that gold was originally called back, it could cause a domino effect. And I believe that's part of it. The good news in all of this, which gold bulls like myself should be well satisfied, is we no longer have the manipulators in the paper market that were basically in London and New York. They're done. They recognize they can no longer just short the paper market and keep it down in the press. Look, even when we have a $30 or $50 down day, years ago, Jeremy, it took weeks, sometimes months to make that up. Now we make it up in hours or a day or two. So the physical demand and the physical gold market now has finally overridden the paper market once and for all. And I think that also is bullish for long-term gold. And the thing that shocks me still is the general financial service industry, at least in the U.S. here, yawns at gold. There's real no interest or holdings yet. And that's why I think the market still has a much further way to go, because we haven't seen the general public involved in the gold market in any major way. No disrespect to what Kitco does and those who are smart enough to be getting people in hundreds of dollars lower, but the vast majority of people in the United States have little or no ownership of gold.
Yeah, go back to this massive transfer of gold for a second, because, as we talk about these hypotheticals, Peter, I mean, who's buying it? Is it the private institutions, foreign governments, or does the U.S. Treasury itself? I mean, it almost feels like the retail investors are sitting this one out.
Oh, they're sitting it out. We know that. We've seen statistics, the GLD. We've seen even the GXJs. We saw net selling of that through much of 2024. You can still go, and no offense, but if you do waste your time and turn on one of the financial networks here, you'll fall asleep before you see a mention of gold. So I don't believe there's real ownership, certainly on the retail or significant institution. I think this is a combination of gold coming back to be used in a big way through the government, and people who have been short have some real serious problems here, who've used derivatives on the gold market on the short side. And I have to tell you something, I'd be less than honest, Jerry, if I didn't tell you that I somewhat enjoy it after all the years of pain that they caused. Then now they're starting to feel a little bit what it feels like to themselves.
Yeah, the paper market. Okay, well, there's also, let's go back to this Fort Knox theme. I mean, Peter, there's the growing speculation about an audit. It hasn't happened since 1974. And what you were just talking about now and what we were discussing on the paper market, I mean, is the U.S. reshoring gold that may have been leased out? Could this be part of a quiet plan to backstop the dollar?
Yes, it is. And I would tell you, remember, that audit also wasn't a full audit. They kind of looked in one area and grabbed a couple of bars and said, okay, let's go grab lunch. I think a real full audit of an actual accounting may surprise people. I mean, it always gave the conspiracy people some concern, the fact that you wouldn't want to have people just come in and get it over with. Here, if you don't believe us, here, look. Go take a look, add it up, and see that it's all there. So I don't know if we'll get to that point, but I'll tell you, if there was ever two people that could get us to that point right now, it's President Trump and Elon Musk right now.
Yeah, they're going fast. Peter, you should try covering it. Every day there's a new story to cover. I want to bring more about this analysis, because there was this new thread on X that we found really interesting. Is from financial analyst Matt Smith. And he suggested, we'll show it here. He says, quote, someone with deep pockets is scooping up gold like the U.S. Treasury or Fed. The theory, they're preparing for a full-on gold audit, meaning they're reshoring gold that might have been leased out. Once audited, that gold could form the backbone of a new monetary system. This could signal a seismic shift in the dollar's status and value. We heard you kind of tease about this, but really bust it open for us here. What do you make of this theory? Could an audit lead to gold playing a greater role in the financial system?
Well, we already know this, Jeremy. The central banks who have been major buyers have been buying it on that basis. They weren't buying it for a trade. Who were they going to sell it to? Yeah. This accumulation that's been going on for several years outside of North America was going on because they were prepared for recognizing that de-dollarization is here. It's great what Trump says. I do think he's making a mistake, threatening to break people's kneecaps, basically, if you don't deal with us. That's the very reason those groups have formed, because they felt that that's what's been given to them. I believe he created a great marketing card for the BRICS, but nevertheless, I believe they recognize that. Now I think the U.S. has come to that conclusion, and I concur with a lot of good people who've a lot smarter than me over years said that they demonstrated that gold had been lent out 3, 4, 5 times more than we had. And I think this is a shoring up because let's face it, the people that were doing that was not mom and pops. These were significant financial institutions and players, and they have a huge problem here now if that's the case. Listen, gold's up tremendously in the last couple of years. They haven't had a chance to shore up those shorts in any real manner. And I think this is all coming together, and it be described as a near perfect storm for gold.
It's a hypothetical, Peter, but if a full audit does happen at Fort Knox, there seems to be two possibilities here. The gold is there, which could be used to revalue the reserves and strengthen the U.S. financial credibility, or the gold is missing, which could send shockwaves through the global markets. What happens if the Fort Knox audit finds that the U.S. has far less gold than officially reported? What would that do to the trust in the U.S. financial system?
Well, I think it would be tremendous, but I can tell you, all those people that used to talk about 5,000, 10,000, people's crazy numbers on gold that were crazy when I was buying at 1,300. People couldn't believe we can get to 2,000. But that would be, it would be probably one of the biggest evers, something far worse than the 1929 crash. If the United States, remember, world's largest supposedly holder of gold still, doesn't have it or doesn't have anything as nearly as much as it does. I can't even believe, as much as Trump wants to be forward and all, that somehow they have to not let it get to that view because it would ruin everything else that they're trying to do. But seeing is believing. I mean, if there was ever a chance to have a real audit in my lifetime, this is it right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we're seeing this shore up, as you mentioned. I mean, if all the gold is accounted for, what impact could that have on monetary policy?
Well, I think they're going to just go forward with what they hope they're going to do. They're going to remonetize it. He's a smart enough businessman to know why keep an asset on our books that we're only carrying it at $42 when we can carry it at current prices, which would give us room to work and use other means to help pay down the debt, or at least pay down deficits to where, we haven't had a balanced budget since Clinton. And even that was a fudged balanced budget. I always tell people this, Jeremy, if you want to start solving problems, pass the constitutional amendment that you can't spend more than you make. If you and I continued like the government does, we'd be out on the street a long time ago. But by and large, that will help ease some of the near concerns about the debt. But the major concerns that all of us had and spoken about these last several years are still here. In fact, if Trump doesn't do some austerity and stop promising almost everybody isn't going to pay taxes, he could actually make the debt worse than it really was.
Yeah. I think about Warren Buffett. I think it's him that says, if they can't balance the debt, just don't let them rerun for government. It would kind of solve it fairly quickly. Okay, we'll switch over here, Peter, because while this is happening in the U.S., Russia and China is also making major moves in the gold market. Russia's central banks have dramatically increased its gold reserves, adding over 100 tons in the past year. China has aggressively been buying gold for 15 straight months, adding 225 tons to its 2024 reserves alone. Chinese banks are experiencing extreme shortages with demand outpacing supply. Let's talk about the moves. Are we witnessing a global shift towards gold-backed monetary systems?
Well, we kind of knew that, for those that paid attention, when the BIS made gold a tier one investment. That really opened the door for these central banks. And if you think about it, since that time, they became major, not only buyers of gold, but they've been divesting themselves of U.S. treasuries. They have sought other alternatives for their reserves. It also plays a role in the BRICS. And whether the BRICS stay a small offshoot group that works among themselves or grows much larger, as some of us, like myself, believe it eventually will, they will have to use something other than a fiat currency in order to show that they're trustworthy and be able to deal with. They've kicked around a couple ideas that will include about 40% in gold and using the other currencies of the countries. But nevertheless, what I think we need to come back to, and I know Bitcoin has stolen the financial media's attention and gold was pushed back to being a relic, but this is what gold has done for a couple thousand years. It's doing the things that a lot of people, including Kitco, have said for years. It's a store of value and a protection of wealth. And that's what it's doing. And now it's being done at a time when people are scurrying to get as much as they can of it, recognizing how useful it really is.
Yeah, you're talking about that scurry. I mean, we just talked about China, Russia. They seem to be kind of, front running this. So, I mean, with all this information, could the U.S. be positioning itself to compete with Russia and China in this regard? Are they a little late to the party, or is that what we're seeing?
There's that talk of that they might do it, or they may recognize that part of this is, listen, I got to take this, that Trump is a shrewd businessman, whether you like him or not. And there's days I like him and there's days I can't stand him. But he's a shrewd businessman. And he may be recognizing that in some way we have to be tough at the moment, but we'll have to not try to beat them, but join them. And maybe there will be a world movement back to a gold back currency or some way. But one thing it's demonstrated again and again and again, it's worked for a few thousand years. And that's why people are going to choose something like that versus something that's only been around a dozen or a couple dozen years, is too volatile and too, swings too much and doesn't have the representation that gold has. And that's what I think is transpiring now. The people with real big money, they recognize that gold is going to be their way out and not something else.
Yeah, and some analysts even believe that China is preparing to launch a gold-backed currency for international trade to challenge the dominance of the U.S. dollar. We've seen the de-dollarization trend for the past year. If these movements start to signify, are they going to happen, and could this threaten the dollar's reserve currency status?
Well, we'll find out a few months from now, Jeremy. The BRICS will meet again in the fall. Right now, they're still having more members join. Yes, Trump had said a few things. He said a lot of things about tariffs and taking over countries and all, which I think he's really out of place to do that. But a lot of his art of dealing, that's what he does. He blusters. He sets up a worst case scenario. So that way, when you do settle lower, you feel like you got something. And he was glad to get that little part to begin with and all. But I do think gold is showing what we've all said. And it's paid to own it. Lost in all of this, Jeremy, in this millennium, which is now 25 years old, since the millennium began, gold has outperformed stocks and bonds. Yeah. Yet if you went into the typical financial service firm anywhere in the U.S., you wouldn't find gold in more than 1% of the people's holdings. Yet the things that they own the most, gold has outperformed both of them.
Yeah, fascinating. To your point, I mean, Bank of America recently projected that gold could hit $3,500, if central banks and institutional demand increases by just 10%, Peter. I mean, 10%. U.S. household debt hit a record $18 trillion in the last quarter of in the last quarter of 2024, according to the New York Fed. Credit card debt alone hits $1.2 trillion, the highest ever. Let's talk about this, because given the debt crisis, the dollar's volatility, the global gold shortages that we're seeing, should individuals be increasing their gold holdings now? I mean, is it too late to get in, or is there still room for a substantial upside?
I think a lot of people will act when there's a fear of missing out. I think when it becomes clearer what will be transpiring with this gold and why it's been moved here, even if the price is higher, people will be more comfortable about buying it because it will become more of a general talking point. Most people are followers. Most people don't lead. And I think that's what it will need. But understand this, and this is a very good point. When I entered the business 40 years ago, and 40 years ago, the stock market was viewed as one of the last places you should invest. For 27 years, it was stuck between 700 and 1,000, Jeremy. And a guy named Robert Prechter Jr., who no one knew at the time, came out and predicted that the Dow was going to go to 3,700. And people were scratching their heads in the early 80s. 3,700. It's never been over 1,000. No one could imagine it could go to 3,700, yet to 40-something thousand 40 years later. The same is about the gold price right now. Most people can't imagine, it really can't go much past 3,000. It used to sell just 800. We have no idea what that could be about because there's not as much of it as much as what people could want of it. Mm-hmm. Look what the buy-in has done so far to it. So I wouldn't put any top number on it. Yeah, you could pick numbers for short term and 3,000's a round number. But remember, this is all new all-time highs. There's no real significance because we've never been here before. But don't think it just can't go higher because just things can't, because that's what people thought about the stock market for a few decades. And yet it went up, 30, 40 times the level that it traded for a lot of years.
Yeah, you mentioned it. I mean, even a year ago at $2,000 gold, we were excited. Here we are edging towards 3,000. I know we don't have a crystal ball here, Peter, but where do you see it at the end of this year, considering all the things we talked about today that's happening in the market that's still being underreported?
Well, Jeremy, if you use a crystal ball, the only thing you end up with is a lot of broken glass at the end of the day. So it's a best educated guess by us.
Yeah.
I think this is really powerful. I think it's two different forces, both going for two different reasons to own the same thing. And that's why that price still has some substantial upside over the rest of the year. A lot of things could impact that. A big hiccup would suddenly be if Trump can't have the free leg that he's basically having now to do these things and all. Mm-hmm. But I also think, like I said, I think we're going to see that the bricks are real. They weren't damaged. And their combination and those part of the world buying gold. Asia, reports of people in stores in China on weekends are shopping for gold like you'd be shopping for food. So I just think there's still a lot of good things happening, and we don't have neither the general public or the so-called mainstream financial service industry behind it. It's when those people are talking about it on a regular basis, that'd be a good time for you and I to talk again about maybe it's time to take our profits.
That's what we'll be doing. I have to ask you before we let you go, though, Peter, I saw your latest post. I was watching your latest interviews. Fairly bullish on the mining industry. I mean, again, an industry that hasn't gotten a lot of eyeballs with the shiny things out there giving larger returns. But with all this free cash flow some of these large miners have, any tips for viewers on where to put some money during this ride?
Well, they're printing money. That's the way I can describe some of the gold producers. And for their future growth, they're going to use their currency, their stock. Mm-hmm. I think we're going to see a dramatic increase in M&A, not only among themselves, but as they go down the food chain to an industry which is still hurting, still struggling to get into a bull market. It's not there yet, the junior resource market. But I think once that starts, and one of the ways I think it's going to start is when a couple of these fairly big companies merge. I'm speculating just an IAM Gold, Agno Eagle type of merger. Right. I think that's going to open the door, and suddenly people are going to look and see these juniors that is, a lot of juniors right now, their gold in the ground is still being valued only between $10 and $40, and gold's hitting 3,000. Once that turns and the people look at it in a meaningful way, then there's going to be a rip-roaring bull market. I don't think we're too far away from that. But if you asked me that 2 years ago, I would have told you that same thing. So I had to point that with caution.
Right. Yeah, no, makes sense. That's interesting. So M&A starts kind of taking play. Are companies just using their free cash flow, or are they using their paper, their stock for some of these deals?
Well, they're going to, the free cash flow is going to create their values of their stock. I mean, right. Look at IAM Gold, just as an example. 24 months ago, people were counting 8, 9, and thought 10 they were out. Now they've made a dramatic turnaround. One of their key mines have turned around, and now their stock has gone up 3 or 4 times from that. Those type of moves at a time when they've paid down a lot of their debt, not just them, but a lot of others, and have so much free cash flow, they're going to look around, and quite frankly, it's a shopping list for them. There's so many smaller, mid-sized companies as well as juniors whose valuations are so incredibly low. It's just going to be too hard to pass, and that's when we're going to see them step up. And once it starts, it'll roll real fast. It's not something that's going to gradual. It's just like a log jam. When they pull that one log out, then the rest of it's going to flow with it.
Yeah, I mean, the market's cyclical for sure. So we're going to see, some of these juniors, some would say that some shouldn't exist. I mean, we've seen a lot of them come to fruition in the past few years, hoping for that bull market. The ones that are, out there succeeding, going to be an interesting year for them, Peter?
Yeah, if I had my wish, there's a lot of these juniors that are lifestyle companies. They're really just a way to live for the people running it and all. I've heard it said, and I don't disagree with it, if hundreds of these little juniors disappear, to be better for all the rest of us. but it's still such a small market cap that any real money that flows into this is just going to drive that whole market dramatically higher. And it has every other ingredient it needed now. Everything but the juniors have moved. And now with the next few quarters, think about this, Jeremy. You're going to see very little earnings increase on General Wall Street. One of the areas people are going to see suddenly is, wow, these gold mining companies, look how much better their earnings are. That'll flow money in that normally doesn't play that market, and that's what will kick it off, in my opinion.
Yeah, wild. Well, we're looking forward to it. Peter Grandich, of course, author, commentator, analyst, and joining us. Thanks for this, Peter. Always a pleasure to see you. And as you mentioned, when we have a little bit more on these stories, we're going to have you on for a little update.
Thank you, Jeremy. God bless you and Kitco.
You too. Appreciate your time. And for those watching, what do you think is really happening? Do you believe the U.S. government could be preparing for a gold reevaluation? Or is this just another cycle in gold's long history? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. For all of us here at Kitco News, I'm Jeremy Safford. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.